Hi there, this is Bob Kramer. Welcome back to my channel, Kramer's Garage. Well, let's take a look at what we're working on today. This is a 1975 Honda Goldwing. This will be the third video in this series of videos about the Honda Goldwing, and today's video is about carburetors. So as you can see, I've removed the carburetors from the engine. The intake ports are wide open. I just cover them with a rag so nothing gets in there, and the carburetors are out here on the bench. All right, so just to give you a quick overview, first of all, I should say that rebuilding carburetors is a very complicated process, and it's difficult for me to make a complete technical how-to video on the whole process, but I will try to hit all the highlights. So anyway, as you can see, I've opened these up. I've taken the float bowls off. I've taken the dash pot caps off. They're sitting here. And I'll show you what the big problem with this carburetor set is. First of all, the float needles that were in here were stuck in the needle seats. So the float needles look like that, and they were stuck in there. I had to pull every one of them out. They were hard to pull out. The engine did run like that, but it was not running right. The pilot jets looked like they were pretty well clogged up. And if you look at this, this is the number 2 carburetor, and if you look right here, this is the post for mounting the float. The end of it is broken off. It should look like that, but you can see, I'm trying to get the camera at the right angle, so you can see that that's broken off. Now, if I didn't have another carburetor, I would probably repair that very carefully with JB Weld. Not JB Weld, no, JB Steel. JB Weld will melt under it with gasoline on it, but JB Steel, which is this product here, the steel stick, this one will not dissolve in gasoline, so it could be used to make a carburetor repair. But anyway, I have another whole set of carburetors that I can use for parts. So I'm going to take this rack apart and get the number 2 carburetor. Let's see, yeah, that's the number 2 cylinder, so it's going to be this one here. So I'm going to get this carburetor off the other rack and replace that broken one. You can see how that works. So that linkage all has to be taken apart to separate the carburetors. There's also the choke linkage, so this lever here operates the choke, and there's a link there that goes to the other side. So you need to pay very close attention to how all this linkage goes together. The first couple times I did this, I took pictures of that linkage with my phone so I could refer to the pictures when I put it back together. So let's look for a minute at the layout of my workbench here. This is all the parts that go back into the carburetors. So these are the pilot jets. This is the primary main jet, secondary main jet, and then primary emulsion tube and secondary emulsion tube. So those are the metal parts that I'm going to reuse. And then this is the clip that holds the main jets in place. Okay, so I'm going to reuse all those metal parts. I'm going to clean them a little bit more. I have to put new O-rings on the jets and all that. Okay, so I've got all that there, 4 of each, 1 for each carburetor. I don't use the repair kits will have new jets in them. I don't usually use the jets from the repair kits. I usually use the original jets and just clean them. Now, the carbs are sitting here on the bench. This is number 1, 2, 3, 4. So when I take them apart, I put the parts in the same order. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, the way they're laid out on the bench, the float bowls and the dash pots. I do that because I prefer to put all the same parts back, all the parts back on the same carburetor they came off of. So there's the bench layout. New parts are here. The old parts that I'm replacing, like float bowl gaskets, all the rubber parts, float bowl gaskets, the float needles, those are all in another box, a junk box that's on my other workbench. I don't need those cluttering up my space. This kit came with a new air cutoff valve. The old air cutoff valve is in here along with the associated parts, which is the cap and the spring. The kit has a new spring in it, along with 3 new O-rings and the diaphragm. Okay, so I'm ready to dig in. The next thing I'm going to do is remove the linkage and separate the carburetors. Okay, one of the float pins is stuck in the holder here. So I have a little inspection hammer and a small punch, and so just very gently I tap that to get it out. And incidentally, this is how the posts get broken off. If people hit this too hard, you break the post off, and that's probably what happened to number 2. The last person that worked on it broke it off. And they put the carburetor back together with the broken post, and I guess it worked, but I'm trying to make it right. All right, now to separate the carburetors, what I do, I hope you can see this. There's 5 screws that hold it together. Honda, in their infinite wisdom, they thought it would be a good idea to use Phillips head screws. So as you can see, I hope you can see what I'm doing here. I'm holding the carb rack between my legs, using my legs as a soft vise. Okay, and that one came loose. Sometimes they're really hard to get loose. Okay, that one came loose. And where's the other one? There should be 2 on this side, 3 on the other side. Okay. I'll turn it over. Now, if the Phillips heads are damaged, replace them with socket head screws. Then you do this with an Allen wrench instead of a screwdriver. There's dowel pins in here. There. Okay, there it is. Now, this has a good gasket here. Yeah, that gasket is good. The way you tell a good gasket is, first of all, if the rubber is above the surface of the aluminum, that's good, because it'll squish against the other mating surface. And then if the rubber is soft, you can press into it with your fingernail and it feels soft and pliable. You can probably reuse that without any issue. All All right, now there's dowel pins, 2 of them. There's 1 and there's 2. So I'm gonna set those over here with the screws. You will see there's a locking tab on these screws so they don't back out. I don't know if that's necessary, if they're properly tightened, but anyway, you have to bend those locking tabs away with a screwdriver first, and then you can back those screws out. And again, I'm gonna try to crack those loose with a number 3 Phillips. Boy, this set wasn't too bad. Sometimes this stuff is really tight. This one wasn't bad at all. And then once you have them loose, you can put an impact driver. I don't have a number 3 bit for the impact driver, so I crack them loose with the number 3, and then I can just spin them out. This is my parts carburetor set that I'm taking apart to get that number 2 carburetor. Okay, so on that screw, I don't know if you can see everything I'm doing here. On that screw, I couldn't get it with the screwdriver. I couldn't get it with an impact driver, so I had to cut a slot in it with a Dremel. And then I was able to turn it with a straight screwdriver. If the screw looks like that by the time you get it out, do not reuse it. I forgot to mention earlier, the carburetors have numbers on them. If you're going to replace a carburetor on a rack, make sure that the number matches. So you can see this one's a 755A. And before I took this rack apart, I had already checked and made sure that these are the same. So this one's also 755A. So it'll be a direct replacement without any problems. So this is how we get all the little orifices inside the carburetor. This is how I get them cleaned out. I generally spray them with WD-40, blow air through them. When you see air blowing out the other end of the passage, then you know that that it's clear. Okay, and I'm gonna take out the pilot adjustment screw. This has a spring and an O-ring. And I will mention that the GL 1100 carburetors are much more difficult to rebuild than the 1000s. They have tiny little passages for the accelerator circuit in the carburetors, and it's really difficult to get them completely clean. Now, as far as these carbs go, you can brush them a little bit with a brass brush and get them cleaned up. I generally don't soak them. I used to soak them, but soaking them in solvent seems to not work all that well, and it seems like it potentially does more damage than it does good. But you can clean a lot of stuff up with just WD-40 and a brush and compressed air. Okay, I'm gonna show you a little trick. I'm getting ready to put carb 2 and 4 back on the air box. Here, there's the air box. Everything's cleaned up. I'm gonna show you a little trick. Smear a little Vaseline on that piece there. That's the shaft that operates the choke plate. So what I've got is I've got a little piece of rubber vacuum hose, and I slide that on there, and then what that does is it holds this coupling in place. It's very difficult to assemble this without dropping that little coupling piece. So I'm just pressing that into that hose. And then you have to back this adjustment screw in all the way so these washers can be separated. Okay. And then, oh, I need to get a vacuum hose on here. Where'd my vacuum hose go? Oh, right here. You put the vacuum hose on first. After it's assembled, it becomes difficult to put them on. You gotta make sure both the throttle plates are open. They're not, or closed. They're not. They're now. Now they're both in the closed position, so I can get the two washers separated. There's springs that go in here too. I put them in after it's assembled. But this is all, as you can see, this is all very tedious and very time-consuming work. That's why having carbs rebuilt is a somewhat expensive proposition. There, okay. They are coupled. The throttle plate is connected and the choke plates are connected. So now comes the next part. These Viton O-rings that were put in there previously are still in perfect condition. I'm putting them back in. Alright, then we're going to need two carb kits. Now they give me all new brass pieces in these kits, all the new jets and everything, needles and all that, but I don't use that. I unless I'm desperate, I use the original brass parts. I just clean them real well. Okay, I'm gonna rub that a little bit with Vaseline. Okay, so I've got the carbs assembled back onto their half of the plenum. There's 2 dowel pins that go in here, like so. Again, I smear a little bit of Vaseline over that gasket. Like that, not much, just a little smear. All right. And this has to sit down over the dowels like that. And there's some screws that go in. There's 1 long one and 4 short ones. Flip it back over and snug the other 2. There's 5 altogether. Yeah, the next thing to do is to start assembling all the little parts. I still have to do a little more cleaning on the jets and emulsion tubes. So I'm going to do that now. Get that stuff all cleaned up, make sure everything is good, and then I can start reassembling the carbs. Okay, each carb kit comes with a new float needle and seat. The brass seat there needs to have an O-ring on it, so the O-ring is also in the kit. And then it does not come with a new screen. The original float valve seat has a screen on it to keep debris out of there coming from your fuel tank, anything that might get through the filter. So you have to make sure you carefully pull the screen off of the original float valve seat, and install that screen on the new one. So I'm going to put the O-ring on first. Okay, there's the O-ring. I'm going to put a little Vaseline on the O-ring. Vaseline on the O-ring. Stick the screen on there and drop that down into its bore. Like so. You have to wiggle it a little bit to get the O-ring to go in. That's the clamp and the screw. These are the original parts. They did not come in the kit. And we're not ready for the float needles yet. And I'm going to do all 4 of them just like that. Okay, so the rack is all together. I'm reassembling the linkage now. I just got the choke linkage piece in place, and now I'm doing the throttle plate linkages. So I've snapped the connecting rods are snapped into place, and then there's a plastic washer. I put a dab of grease in there. There's a little, like a ball joint. And then you've got this little circlip, or C-clip, or E-clip maybe you'd call it. But it's very small and very fragile. If you squeeze it too hard with your pliers, it'll bend into a taco shape very easily. You have to be very gentle. There. Okay, that's on there. We're going to make sure that's seated. So as we can see, my linkage is all working good. Now sometimes these small parts are pretty hard to come by. You have to be careful with these things. If you start losing or damaging parts, you could wind up in a situation where it's very difficult to find the absolutely correct part. So this is the pilot jet. It's very small. You should be able to look at it and see daylight through the pinhole in there. Now I already did spray these, or well, I soaked them in carb cleaner and then I blew them out with air. But anyway, what I'm doing now is I've got a little piece of piano wire here. It's very thin, and I just like to put that through the jet, make sure it's clear, and then hit it with a little compressed air, drop it into the hole. And I had to take a screwdriver and grind it a little bit in here to fit in there properly. And then I can screw that in. I'm putting the pilot jets in first because those are the only ones that are threaded in. The rest of them are all just pushed in. So I'm fishing all the O-rings out of the carb kits. Be very careful not to lose them. So those are the O-rings for the main jets. So as you can see, this is the primary main jet. The O-ring goes on the, well, I don't know how to describe it, the end that, this end. You can see the two ends are different. The O-ring goes on this end. These are a little bit tedious to put on, everything is so small, but there we go. So there's the O-ring on the primary main jet. And then on the secondary main jet, you can again see that the two ends are very different. The O-ring goes on this end. How do I know? I've done this before. There. So I'm going to do all of these jets like that. There's 8 of them all together, 2 for each carburetor. And then I'm going to set the floats, and then we put get the floats set, and then we put the jets in, and then the covers go on. To ream these holes and clean them. Okay. And hopefully that'll allow the float pins to go in there much more freely. All right, this is the float needle, and that hangs on the float like that. And then we set that float down in place, drop the needle into its seat, which is the brass piece we put in a little while ago. And then we're gonna get a little Vaseline on that pin to help it slide in. Get the little hammer, tap it a little gently. Now I suppose there's different people probably do this different ways, but what I do is I take my caliper. The float height on this is supposed to be 21 millimeters. So I take my caliper, set it at 21 millimeters or 20.95, and then I lock it with the screw, lock it in place. All right, and then I tip my carburetors like that and let them fall back until the floats just drop onto their needles. Now, the float should spring like that. When you push on it, the mechanism in the float needle should allow it to spring back. Now I'm going to do it again. I've verified that they spring back okay. I'm going to do it again, and now I'm going to measure. They're both a little bit low. You have to measure to the face of the carburetor. So I need to let those floats, both of them, go up a little higher. By higher, I mean they're going to be higher in their float bowl. And gently bend that tab. Like, I think I might have bent it too much. It's sitting right on the float bowl now. Go to the other one. Okay, they definitely moved. See, the idea here is you don't want the actual weight of the float affecting the measurement. This one's real close. This one's still kind of far off. So you keep doing that. It's trial and error, obviously. You keep doing that until you get them to where they're all very close to the same measurement, and the factory measurement is 21 millimeters, so we're getting as close as we can get to that. A little hole down in the bottom there that has to be clear. Best way to make sure it's clear is to put a little WD-40 in it, and it should squirt. Don't get it in your eye like that. Once that's all polished up, when you drop it in there, the spring should push it back up. If it doesn't, you're going to have poor throttle response. So we take that spring, I'm going to stretch it out like that. There. That's what you want. You want it to push it up nearly level with the edge of the cap. There. That one's good. Good to go. Meanwhile, Vaseline on the O-ring. It's the pilot adjustment screw. Screw it all the way down. And then I back it up 3 turns, and that's the starting point. And then I adjust it from there when the engine's running. Alright, here's my carburetor rebuild project all complete. You'll notice I did not install the air cutoff valve yet because it has to be removed in order to install the carbs in the motorcycle. There's not quite enough clearance under the frame, so I have to leave that off, and I'm going to have to remove one dash pot cap, this one, in order to slide that into the frame. So I've gone over the caps and the intake runners with a little mother's aluminum polish. So they shined up pretty nicely. They all look good, almost like new, probably like new. And then the rubber part of the intake runner, I went over with Mother's Back to Black. It's a restoration product that I use on rubber parts, rubber and vinyl. And so anyway, that's my carburetor rebuild. I will be putting these back in the bike later today, and we'll get the bike running again. So I'm going to wrap up this rebuild. If you were curious about the carburetor rebuild, now you can see what's involved. It's quite tedious. It's the most tedious and time-consuming part of this whole project. So I've spent, I think, let me see how much time I've spent on these carbs now. It's 3 o'clock, that's 2 hours and 6. I've spent 8 hours on these carbs now, which is pretty typical. Normally when I rebuild a set of carbs, I wind up spending about 8 hours or so just on the carburetor rebuild. So that's not unusual at all for me. Now, in here, the top of this engine's actually pretty clean, and the paint's not peeling off. That's almost kind of unusual. So I'm just going to clean it up a little bit with some engine cleaner that I have, and just wipe it off, and then I can put the carbs in. I have to do the throttle cables first before I put the carbs in, because you have to connect the throttle cables to the carburetors as you're installing them. Once they're installed, you can't connect the cables. So that's what I'll be doing next. New throttle cables, and then put the carbs in, and I'll have this thing running again. I think I'm gonna drain the old fuel out of the gas tank and put fresh gas in it. I ran it a little bit the other day with the old gas in it. It ran, but it doesn't smell good, and judging from the residue that I found inside the carburetors, I think I need to put fresh gas in it. So all right, well, that's the end of the carburetor video. So if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, leave me some comments what you think of my carburetor rebuild job. And oh, you'll notice I left the right hand side intake runners off because they have to be off to install the carburetors. You have to have the right side intake runners off, and you have to have this front right cap off the #1 cylinder in order to complete the installation. So anyway, well, stay tuned for more good projects from Kramer's Garage. Thanks for watching.